Welcome back to how they can fix blank in Warhammer 3. Today we're going to do battles and kind of armies in general because when I restricted it to just battles, there wasn't really enough to fill out a video. If you're not familiar with the layout of these videos, I'm first of all going to outline the problems and then go through them one by one, offering my personal solutions. Of course, these videos are made by my own opinions and ideas, and I'm not saying that these are the conclusive fixes to these problems, I'm just saying that's how I would like to see them. If you have any ideas of how you'd like to fix any of these problems or ones I haven't mentioned, then please leave them down in the comments below. Also, to get out of the way at the start, if you want to see more videos like this, I have a whole host of them planned, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. I'd appreciate it very much. We hit 18k quite recently. That is very, very exciting to me. And at 20,000, I think I'm going to do something special like a big Q&A or some sort of live stream. So definitely subscribe if you want to see that. Anyway, let's get into the problems. So first of all, unit formations. They're one of those things that have been in a lot of Total War games before Warhammer, and then since they've done Warhammer, they've just seemed to have forgot about them. It makes no sense why they're not in, and I would really like to see them. Now the next one, a similar problem to the Sieges video, is that the maps are really tiny for the most part, and when you look at older games, it's very, very stark to see how tiny the maps are. And a side problem that is because of this is that the maps being so small means that any features that are on the maps are packed into a small area, resulting in massive mountains and hills and weird clusters of rocks and forests, rather than anything natural looking. We also have a massive lack of alternate ammunition and weapons, and you might be saying, yes, there are units that do have fire arrows, but why isn't that just a toggleable thing like it has been in previous games? Why can't I just click a button and say I want to fire arrows or poison arrows or go from a sword and a shield to dual swords? The Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower literally has this feature, so you can't tell me it isn't possible. It would also be very nice to see custom garrisons. The garrison system as it is very simplistic and easy to use, but it's not really the best. If the garrison has a bunch of units that I don't like or aren't very good, then I can't do anything to change that. And the final, well, this isn't really a problem, but it's something I would like to see, is an army painter. I've left this one till the end because it's not really a problem, but you know, it'd be pretty cool to see. So now let's get into the solutions, starting with the unit formations. As I mentioned, in a lot of older games, so it makes zero sense why they aren't here now. They are an integral part of any battle because in all of history, even made up history, when has there ever been a battle when just both sides sprint at each other with not really any formation or strategy? And I understand that it's hard to work with because monsters existing can disrupt formations, but adding some options would make every single unit more powerful, including the monsters, and add a lot more depth and strategy to your battles. Now the solution is of course pretty simple. Give formations to units, but obviously we can go into more depth than that. Let's come up with some universal formations that pretty much every unit of a certain type can use no matter the faction. So loose formation is of course the first one that comes to mind. It's pretty simple. Your units stand spread out to reduce the chances of getting hit by missiles or magic in this case. Of course, this is coming over from the older games where magic didn't exist, but it would work just the same because what spell can cast a large enough area of damage to hit units when they are stood that spread out? Of course, this makes you weaker in melee and vulnerable to getting charged, since enemies can literally walk through your line, so if the enemy has any cav or chariot units or is getting up close to you, you do not want to be in this formation. Now literally every single unit that has multiple entities could make use of this, unless maybe they are artillery or feral units, since you don't really have that much control over them. Next up we have phalanxes, and this is basically the formation you see in the 300 movie when they are holding the narrow passage. It's pretty much a wall of shields with these spears sticking out. This does restrict infantry speed to being quite slow since they have to stay in formation and carry those heavy spears. Of course, this being said, it only makes sense for infantry with long pointy sticks like spears and halberds to make use of this, and they would also need shields for it to be fully effective. So a wall of shields with spears sticking out the front will give you resistance to range damage as well as any infantry that charges into you. It pretty much negates all charge bonus as long as they attack from the front because they're going to be running literally into your weapons. This would mean that if enemies charge you, they're actually damaging themselves more than they're damaging you. Now the downside of this is that it does blow up units for artillery and magic, but the upside of it is it would give you massive resistance to pretty much all forms of charge no matter what type of unit it is, as well as giving you massive defense from the front. Now charging formation, or whatever you want to call it, is that triangular formation that the Bretonnian units have access to, so it really makes no sense why all cav units, at least cav units are trained, can also have this. Literally copy and paste this one with a slight nerf if you want Bretonnia to keep some power, because what cav unit cannot run in a triangular formation that supposedly maximizes their charge potential? It makes no sense. Final one I'm going to suggest is the Testudo or the Shield Turtle. Now this is one of those that you will be familiar with if you are fairly familiar with Roman history. It does what it says in the tin and makes the unit into a slow moving turtle type thing with all exposed area covered with shields. This could obviously only work with units with large shields, since if they didn't have large shields, they'd just kind of be holding dinner plates over their heads. Now this makes them super tough to most forms of damage since they're covered on all sides, so ranged fire pretty much just bounces straight off, magic would have to go through the shields, and if it's not a armor piercing type of magic, it'd probably not get through at all. Now in actual melee combat, this wouldn't be the most effective because it makes them super slow and their damage output isn't the best since, you know, they're kind of all hidden under this big shroud. But aside from that, it gives them massive defense from a variety of sources, and I think it should also give them charge bonus because they're all really braced up against each other, so it'd be hard to move them. Now, of course, there are many formations that we could add on top of this, but these are just some to get started off with. I feel like if I want to name every single formation that every single unit in every single faction could do, that could be a whole video in itself, so let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like to see. But the main takeaway from this is that there are many formations that we could add for all sorts of units, and they would just make battle a lot more strategic and interactive. Yes, monsters do make things harder since they can just barrel through most formations, but you can make it so some formations offer a massive defense versus monster charges. So say a monster runs into the phalanx, it's not really going to break because they have the spears out there that will slow it down and do a lot of damage, as well as being braced. Same thing with the testudo. So choosing when to use certain formations would be even more essential. Say you see a massive monster come towards you, quickly get into a phalanx. Say you have a lot of ranged fire hit towards you, quickly get into the loose formation, and then cancel that as soon as you get into melee range. It just adds a lot more depth and strategy to the game, and in a strategy game, that sounds like a good thing to me. Next up, we have the size of the maps, and as I mentioned, this was in the Sieges video, but I'm just going to reiterate it here because Siege maps and regular battle maps are a little bit different. Now the maps, as I mentioned, super duper tiny, especially when you look at older games. The tutorial for Rome 2 has a bigger map. There is literally an entire land battle going on whilst the city is under siege, and you can barely see each other when you're in each of the battles. Of course, this problem goes hand in hand with the fact that massive battles lag the current game, so something needs to be done to remedy this. And of course, the side problem of maps being so small that features are packed into a tiny area, resulting in those huge unclimbable hills and the weird clusters of rocks, forests, and other features. Now, the lag thing is a little hard to fix outside of making a new engine and optimizing it, so for this, I'll have to leave that one to the devs, unfortunately. That being said, as I mentioned in the Siege video, most people will take worse graphics in exchange for better battles, so definitely consider that, devs, if you're listening, which I know you are. Okay, so the obvious fix for tiny maps is to make the maps bigger. Okay, thank you very much for watching, that's me. Obviously, I can go into a little more effort than that. Obviously, just making big empty maps is not what we want, because then there really is no strategy, it's just a big blank sheet of paper. Make maps that are large with plenty of tactical terrain, but not as drastic as some places. You could literally stretch some of the Warhammer 2 maps to double their size, and they'd be fine because everything would be spread out and look more natural. 3K has massive maps with loads of forests, and I hate them less than the forest maps in Warhammer 2 because they aren't believable. I know I'm not a game designer or a map designer or a landscape photographer or anything, but to my head it makes sense to have a large map with lots of space with natural formations. I know Warhammer isn't a natural world, but its landscape should not look like this. If you look at screenshots of some maps from other games and put them next to maps from Warhammer 2, the other games look like landscape shots, whereas Warhammer 2 looks like a map in a video game, which isn't the best for immersion or tactical strategy. A forest over here, a slight incline, maybe some natural water formations and some cliffs, maybe even some small buildings to show that the world is lived in. This would go a long way to make maps look nice and be fun to play on. If there's a forest to the left that I can send my sneaky units through and a nice valley where I can hold the enemy with the majority of my front line's force, then that adds a lot of strategy. If it's just a big flat map with a massive hill on one side and some random trees in the middle, it doesn't really make much sense. Now moving on to alternate ammunition and weapons. Again, we literally have units that fire poison arrows and fire arrows, even variants. We have the Peasant Bowman, where you have the default variant, you have the fire arrow variant, and the poison variant. So why can't we just have it as a switch that flips? Why can't we have the Bowman and then say, oh, I want them to fire fire arrows, let me just click this button to toggle that on, boom, the fire and fire arrows. As I said, the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower and a couple of other artillery units literally have this feature where you can select two different forms of ammunition. So you can't tell me it's not possible because it just factually is. Again, very simple solution here, just add the goddamn options. And again, I'll offer some standard options that most factions should have access to. Fire arrows, just the same as they are now, less damage to armor, but better versus flammable units and cause some leadership debuffs. And maybe nerf the firing rate like older games if you want to make it a bit less overpowered. Poison arrows, do slightly less damage but apply the poison effect. Nice and easy. Now I understand why they're not in the game already, because it allows them to add units to the game that basically bolster the ranks. So if you get rid of all of the variations of different units, so say you get rid of the Peasant Bowman, you're going from 3 units there down to 1. And then with the Artillery in Bretonia, you're going from 2 units there down to 1. So yes, I can absolutely understand why they don't want to do this, but if they can inspire some creativity, work with Games Workshop to come up with some unique units, And I think adding alternate ammunition types would be very nice. Now, if you don't want it to be in by default, then maybe make it a research or an upgrade like the green skin scrap mechanic. So you can buy some fire arrows for some of your archers as an option. You don't need to buy it from them all because it increases their upkeep and their cost, but you can buy it. And then you can research poison ammunition, and then it's available to purchase for some units. It just brings a bit more customizability to the campaigns, and of course, strategy for battle. Now, the next problem to go over is custom garrisons. Now, garrisons are all great and all, adding walls, absolutely, should be a building. But why can't we customize what we're leaving to defend our settlements? There is nothing worse than having to defend settlements, and you load into the battle, and what is before you but an army that you would never ever pick. It's got units from a way early stage in the game than you're at. It's just got random units that you would never ever use to defend a settlement. It's terrible. Then why not give us a system like the old game where you could leave an army to defend your settlement, or take all of the units out of the settlement, but leave your settlement exposed to just easily be taken? Now, controversial opinion incoming, I don't really like the old style of games in a lot of ways. I think having to send diplomats to interact with factions rather than the diplomacy screen is a little bit dumb. Realistic, for sure, but very dumb and makes the game a little bit clunky. That being said, this part makes total sense that you leave behind specific units to defend your settlements. If I want to take all the soldiers out of the settlement in the center of my entire empire that will never get attacked, at least not before I can recruit a massive army and see it coming a mile off, then I should be able to do that. If I want to leave a massive army protecting the settlement that I just took that's on the front lines, then I should also be able to do that. Now, the main issue I see with this is, first of all, new players would find this system a little bit jarring because, as I said, Warhammer 2 system is flawed and not customizable, but it is simple. You build the building, there's a garrison, upgrade it, now there's walls and a better garrison, and so on and so forth. With the new system, you have to think exactly what units you want to defend your lands. It also means that the building slot for garrisons would now just be taken up by walls, which is a little bit of a waste when settlements have 3 slots. Which reminds me, settlements probably need some work doing, so subscribe to catch that video whenever I do it. But anyway, in the new, old system, you would build an army and leave it to defend. Now, this would be hard to implement since the current game relies on lords as your armies, and garrisons don't need lords to lead them. You would need to either rework the army system, but I doubt they'd do that since lords are so important. Instead, what they could do is let's recruit armies for the settlements so that the settlement itself acts as the lord. Then, if you want to move your army from, say, Castle Drakenhof to Altdorf or wherever, you select the units you want to send and right-click on the other settlements, then it takes them as many turns as it would for a normal army to get there, and while they're en route, you can choose between forced march or regular march if you're scared of getting attacked. If you want to change destination halfway through, say Altdorf is getting besieged and you're never going to defend it in time and you want to put it in the next closest settlement, then you can select the army and can only select from another of your settlements or lords. Now, these armies cannot attack but can trade units with your lords. So say you have a lord that has taken a lot of casualties and he's on the outskirts of Altdorf, you send the garrison from one of your more built-up settlements and then embed it into his army, boom, he's back to a turning stack, he can go out and attack. But that does leave your settlement undefended. Now, these armies may not be able to attack, but they also can be attacked, and that plays out like any other army. So they get attacked, they can auto-resolve, you can manually fight it, or you can retreat. On top of this, replenishment can work just the normal as it does with any other armies. So if they get attacked on the way, take a few casualties, and they're in friendly land, then they replenish that on the way. I think that this system would be a way for them to bring the old and the new ways of having a garrison into Warhammer 3, and I think it'd be very interesting. Yes, they'd have to rework a lot of things, like upkeep would need to be drastically changed because you would have a lot more units that you would have specifically selected, and with the garrisons in the game now, they cost no upkeep, so you could basically get all those units for free, whereas these ones, you'd have to pay for them somehow. Maybe have it so that each settlement has a certain budget for a garrison, and upgrading the walls gives you more budget. Again, there are many things that you could work out for this, but this system that I've laid out here, I think it would be very cool to see and very unique. I think it'd definitely be fresh to spice up the Warhammer 2 gameplay style of, okay, got this settlement, let's build this, okay, now it's defended as much as I can, let's go. And the final thing I'd like to talk about is the army painter, and as I said, again, not exactly a problem, but it'd be really cool to have. So an army painter would allow us to make factions look exactly how we want them to. Want to make your own custom branch of the Empire that wear all pink? Now you can. Want to make your all black heavy metal dwarves? Then go for it. Give us full access to the full color spectrum and maybe even different paint types. So you want glossy, metallic, matte, anything. You can make the Empire, you can make the dwarves, you can make anyone look any way you want. Then let us use these army skins online in multiplayer and maybe even single player campaigns because who's it hurting? It's a single player game. Now this would be a massive Steam Workshop thing too, where users can share their faction skins and use each other's. You can upload them, you can download other people's, it'd be great. I've never painted miniatures before, and I would love this, so I can imagine the big nerds who have been painting Warhammer for decades would absolutely fall in love with this. Besides, it's a way to paint miniatures without sinking in all of your life savings. Now that about wraps it up for this video. I hope you've enjoyed this. As I mentioned at the start, let me know down in the comments if you agreed with any of my fixes to these problems, if you have any problems that I haven't mentioned, or if you have any alternate fixes to the problems I've laid out. Then be sure to leave all of that down in the comments below. If you want to see more videos like this, then definitely be sure to subscribe. I'm planning to do quite a number of them in the run up to Warhammer 3, as well as a bunch of other Warhammer-based content, and who knows, maybe even some games aren't Warhammer 2. But one more time, thank you so very much for watching, and for now, I've been Colonel Damneders, and I will see you next turn.